Before we move on and return to Abraham in Genesis chapter 20, I found it necessary to clarify the traditional code of ethics and morality of the ancient world. This was in response to a question someone posed about what Lot was willing to do to protect the two guests he was sheltering. It appeared to him it was unthinkable to sacrifice his two virgin daughters to a savage mob just to shelter guests in his home. Many commentators have pointed to this event as highlighting the depths of depravity to which Lot had gone. What Lot, in fact, was doing was practicing hospitable asylum. Part of the code of the universally understood law of hospitality in the ancient world. As hard as it is for us in the 21st century to understand, Lot was, in fact, doing a sacrificial and righteous act. Probably one of the very few righteous acts he ever did. So, how could we define righteousness and evil according to the ancient times leading up to Abraham? The first introduction to good and evil came in Genesis 2:16 and 17, in the Garden of Eden. When the Lord God commanded the man, saying, "Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die." There is no mention of any fruit, just which tree could be eaten from. That's the good. The evil came when Adam and Eve disobeyed God and ate from the only forbidden tree. Disobedience is then established as defining evil, as being evil. Next, after that incident with Adam and Eve, evil was further defined as rebellion, which led to murder as Cain killed his brother Abel. Now, Jesus, about 4,000 years later, gave a simple definition of morality, or what's good. In two commandments in Mark 12:29 to 31. It says this: "The Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment, and the second is like, namely this: thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is no other commandment greater than these." I'm certain that mankind should have figured this simple code out for themselves. Unfortunately, most of us don't. According to this, there were and are only two kinds of people. Oh, let me start again. According to this, there were and are only two kinds of people obedient to God. or disobedient to God. So, obedient or disobedient? Loving God completely or disrespecting God? In short, idolaters or worshippers. How do we know this? We see this by what God noticed in Genesis 6, 5-6, and Genesis 11, verse 12. And I'll read that. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. You see, it says the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. There's that word evil. God wasn't even thought of. Even though the Garden of Eden with the flaming angels was a conspicuously visible landmark in the pre-flood landscape, most of mankind simply developed an obsessive hate of God. Needless to say, the earth was renovated by a universal flood, with only 8 humans preserved to rebuild mankind. Did that wipe out all the evil? Unfortunately not. After the flood and after the Tower of Babel, people developed traditions of hospitality, which varied from culture to culture. What they all had in common, however, was that a visiting stranger or weary traveler would find rest, food, shelter, and asylum. The reasoning behind this was that the welcoming host might also someday find himself in the same position. Abraham practiced this in Genesis 18, verses 1-8, with the 3 heavenly visitors. And Lot attempted to do the same in Genesis 19, verses 1-9. Now, because the tradition of hospitality was generally practiced by good people, it would stand to reason that the Sodomites did not recognize it, but rather ignored and rebelled not only against Lot, but against God himself. This can be seen by what God said in Genesis 18, 20-21. Because the city of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which has come unto me. Their abominable sin came as a cry to God. Now I get to today's point. Christians are both commanded and encouraged to practice hospitality. Consider Romans chapter 12, verse 13, which orders us to distribute to the necessity of the saints and given to hospitality. And how about 1 Peter 4, verse 9, which tells us to use hospitality one to another without grudging? The idea is that we're family. Paul also said it best in Galatians 5, verse 14. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this: thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Folks, loving thy neighbor as thyself? Isn't that what authentic hospitality is really about?